The building fell on a Tuesday. That was how Ray Calloway would always remember it. Not by the name of the planet, not by the official incident report number that the interstellar civilian aid corps filed 3 weeks later, but by the day. Tuesday. The kind of day that starts ordinary and ends with you carrying something small and warm inside your jacket while the sky turns orange from somebody else's war. Riva 3 was not a remarkable planet. It grew grain. It exported grain. It had 2 moons, 1 river that mattered, and roughly 40,000 people who had been living quietly and without complaint until 2 factions decided the system was worth fighting over. The people of Riva 3 had no opinion about which faction was right. They had an opinion about leaving. That opinion was, now please. Ray had been on Riva 3 for 11 days as part of the aid corps evacuation coordination team. His job was logistics. Who went on which shuttle? Which supplies came with them? Which buildings still had people in them? It was not a glamorous job. It was a necessary one, and Ray was good at it in the way that people who do not panic tend to be good at things. He was checking the last row of storage structures on the south side of the settlement when the building at the end of the row shifted. Not collapsed, not yet. Shifted. The way old structures do when something underground has given up. Ray stopped walking. He looked at the building. The building made a low groaning sound. He went inside anyway. His co-worker, Dyra, watched him go in from 30 meters away and said several things in her native language that the translation chip in Ray's ear declined to render, on the grounds that the sentiment was too layered to convert cleanly. The general meaning was somewhere between disbelief and grief. Inside the building, past a collapsed shelf unit and a section of ceiling that had decided to become a floor, Ray found the egg. It was not intact. It had cracked along one side, the kind of crack that happens when something inside pushes outward. The shell was dark, almost black, with a faint shimmer to it that caught the dusty light coming through the broken wall. It was roughly the size of a large watermelon. Beside it were the remnants of something larger. Scales. Ray did not look at those for long. The thing inside the egg was looking at him. One eye, orange, like a coal that had not finished burning, blinking slowly. Ray crouched down. He tilted his head. The eye tracked him. He said, "Hey." The hatchling made a sound. It was somewhere between a chirp and a hiss, and something that had no good comparison. It was also, very clearly, the sound of something small and confused and frightened. Ray sat down on the dusty floor of the collapsing building and thought about it for about 4 seconds. Then he took off his outer jacket, wrapped it around his hands, and carefully reached into the cracked egg. The hatchling was the size of a house cat. Gray-black scales, for limbs with small claws, a tail that curled reflexively around Ray's wrist the moment he lifted it. Wings, folded flat and damp, pressed against its sides. It weighed almost nothing. It stared at him with both eyes now, and its whole small body was shaking. Ray tucked it against his chest inside his jacket and walked back out of the building. Dyra saw him emerge. She saw the shape under his jacket. She saw the small scaled tail curling out from the bottom hem. Her 6 eyes went very wide, and she said, in standard trade language, very quietly, "Ray, what is that?" "Found it in there," Ray said. "Mother's gone." "Ray, what species is that?" "Small one. Scared one." He was already moving toward the evac point. "Do you have any of those protein ration packs left?" "The soft kind." Dyra moved in front of him. All 6 of her arms came up in the gesture her species used to indicate maximum urgency. "Ray, those scales, those wings. Do you know what that is?" Ray looked down at his jacket. The orange eyes blinked up at him from the gap in the fabric. "It's a baby," he said. "It is a Veldrath." Dyra said the word the way someone says the name of a natural disaster. "Ray, a Veldrath hatchling. Do you understand what that means? Do you know what the adult form of that creature? Do you have the ration packs or not?" Dyra made a sound that her species reserved for moments of complete social collapse. She reached into her supply kit and handed him a soft ration pack. Ray tore the corner off with his teeth and squeezed a small amount onto 2 fingers. He held it near the gap in his jacket. The hatchling sniffed it. Then, with the careful uncertainty of something that had never eaten outside of a shell. It licked his fingers. Ray said, "There you go." The hatchling made that sound again, the one with no good comparison. They walked to the evac shuttle. The shuttle pilot, a Grecian named Pol who had 17 years of experience and zero intention of dying on a grain planet, took one look at the shape under Ray's jacket and said, "No. It's small," Ray said. "It is a Veldrath. Right now it's a baby that needs a ride. I will be court-martialed. You'll be fine. I'll write the report. I'm good at reports." Ray stepped onto the shuttle. Also, the building behind us is currently in the process of becoming a flat surface, so if we could go. Pol looked at Dyra. Dyra looked at Paul. They shared the particular expression of two beings who have each separately decided that whatever happens next is not their fault. The shuttle left Riva 3 with 11 evacuees for 100 kilograms of emergency medical supplies and one Veldrath hatchling who had fallen asleep inside a logistics coordinator's jacket. Ray named him Soot. He named him that because of the color of his scales and because it was the first word that came to mind, and because Ray was not the kind of person who spent a lot of time on decisions that felt obvious. For the next 3 hours of the flight, while the rest of the shuttle sat in silence and tried not to look at the small-scaled creature in Ray's lap, Ray fed Soot slow, careful amounts of protein paste and occasionally scratched him behind the small ridge of horns that ran from his forehead to the base of his neck. Soot pressed into the scratching with his whole body. Dyra watched all of this from the seat across the aisle. She had her documentation tablet open. She was supposed to be filing the Riva 3 evacuation summary. Instead, she wrote, in her personal log, "The human found a Veldrath hatchling and has named it. I do not think he understands what naming means in this context. I do not think he understands what any of this means. I am going to document everything, because I believe future generations will want to know how it started." She paused. Then she added, "It started with protein paste and a word that means something gray." On Ray's lap, Soot slept the deep, unconscious sleep of something very young that has just decided, without any ceremony, that it is safe. It had taken him approximately 40 minutes to make this decision. Ray looked out the shuttle window at the orange sky of Riva 3 getting smaller. He thought about where he was going to put a growing dragon in Standard Aid Corps quarters. He thought about what the dietary requirements might be. He thought about whether the station had a veterinarian. He did not think about the part where a Veldrath imprint bond is the single most permanent biological commitment in the known galaxy. He did not think about this, because nobody had told him yet, and he would not have stopped anyway. He scratched Soot behind the horns. Soot made a sound like a very small, very warm engine turning over in the dark. The shuttle flew on. Nobody on Anchor 7 had ever received a formal complaint written in 4 different languages before. Station Director Hosvelen had. He had received 6 of them. In the first week alone, all about the same subject, all landing on his desk in the same tidy stack, all requiring a response he did not know how to write. The subject was Ray Calloway's quarters at the end of Corridor D. More specifically, the subject was what was living inside them. Soot had been on Anchor 7 for 3 weeks. In that time he had grown. Not enormously, not yet, but enough that the shape visible through the small window beside Ray's door was larger than it had been, and the small sounds that came from inside the quarters at various hours were louder than they had been. Not frightening sounds. Sounds like something moving around in a space slightly too small for it, and occasionally a low rumbling that the station's environmental system kept flagging as a possible ventilation issue. The complaints were not about the sounds. The complaints were about the knowledge, the species, the word that kept appearing in every formal document. Veldrath. Director Velen called Ray into his office on a Thursday morning and sat across from him with the stack of complaints between them like a wall. "You understand," Velen said, "what that creature is." "He's about 4 months old," Ray said. "Roughly. We're not sure of the exact hatch date." "That is not what I asked." "He's also settled into a good sleep schedule, which I'm told is important at this stage." Velen's 8 eyes closed briefly in the expression his species used for the gathering of patience. "Calloway, a Veldrath, on a civilian aid station, with 340 personnel and 2 active diplomatic residencies. Do you understand the position this places me in? Ray said, I've read the formal complaints. Every one of them is filed on the basis of potential risk. I looked up the relevant core regulations last night. He put a folded paper on the desk. Section 14, paragraph 9. A core employee may retain a companion animal aboard a designated residential station, provided the animal poses no verified active threat to personnel. Soot hasn't threatened anyone. He is a Veldrath. He is also, right now, asleep in my quarters on a blanket I bought at the supply exchange. The threat category requires documented incident. There are no incidents. Ray paused. The complaints are about what he might do, not what he has done. Velen stared at the paper. He stared at Ray. He said, this conversation is not finished, in a way that meant it was for now. Ray went back to work. The station adapted, slowly and unhappily, to the presence of soot. Most of the adaptation happened in the form of avoidance. Personnel who worked in Corridor D began using the longer route through Corridor F. The 2 diplomatic residencies on the station submitted joint correspondence asking for clarity on liability in the event of, as they phrased it, unforeseen escalation. Director Velen filed the correspondence and did not respond. The one person on Anchor 7 who did not avoid Corridor D was Ren. Ren was a technician, 24 years old, assigned to the station's communications relay systems. She lived 3 doors down from Ray. She had been watching the situation from a distance for 2 weeks with the kind of fascinated calm that some people develop when they are simply not built to be afraid of things other people find obvious. She knocked on Ray's door on a Wednesday evening. Ray opened it. Behind him, on the floor, Soot lifted his head and looked at her. He was the size of a large dog now. The orange eyes caught the corridor light. The small horns had grown a little. The wings were folded against his back. He looked at her, and then he looked at Ray, and then he looked back at her. Ren said, "Oh, he's beautiful." Soot made a low sound. Ray said, "He is when he's not hungry." He opened the door wider. "Come in." That was how Ren became Soot's second person. Not through any formal process. Not through any decision. Simply by coming through the door and sitting on the floor and letting Soot sniff her hand for 30 seconds before he decided she was acceptable. Ren told Ray later that she had expected it to feel more dangerous. Ray said, "Most things are less dangerous than they are described." Ren said she was not sure that was universally true. Ray said nothing and gave Soot the evening meal from a container he had prepared before she arrived. The meal was the thing around which everything else organized itself. Ray worked irregular hours. The aid corps ran on need, not schedule, and there were days when Ray's shift ended at the normal time and days when it ran 3 hours long without warning. Soot could not read a clock. Soot could not receive messages. Soot experienced time the way young things experience it, as a sequence of events, not intervals. Ray home. Ray not home. Food. Not food. The problem was that when Soot was hungry and Ray was not home, Soot expressed it, not aggressively, but persistently. He would sit at the door and make sounds. The sounds carried in the corridor. The corridor connected to other corridors. The complaints reached Velen's desk with a new kind of energy. Ray solved this with a rule. He explained it to Soot one evening, the way he explained most things to Soot, calmly, directly, without assuming Soot did not understand simply because he was young. He sat on the floor. Soot sat in front of him, close enough that Ray had to tilt his head up a little to meet the orange eyes. He said, "Here's the thing. I can't always be home at the same time. But we eat together. That's our thing. So the rule is, no eating until I'm home. When I come through the door, we eat. Not before." Soot listened. Soot always listened when Ray talked directly to him. It was one of the first things Dyra had noted in her documentation. The hatchling exhibited sustained attention during directed human speech that exceeded observed norms for the species by a significant margin. Ray put Soot's evening bowl on the floor near the door. He went and sat on the other side of the room. He waited. Soot looked at the bowl. He looked at Ray. He walked to the door, turned around. and sat down next to the bowl without eating from it. Ray said, "Good." He got up, walked across the room, sat down next to Soot, and said, "Now we eat." Soot ate. That was the rule. It took one evening to establish. It held from that point, without variation, which was something that several Veldrath behavioral researchers, reading Dyra's documentation much later, would describe in their own professional language as essentially impossible. Veldrath did not accept behavioral conditions from other species. Veldrath did not defer to external schedules. Veldrath had never, in the recorded literature, been observed voluntarily waiting for anything. None of these researchers had met Ray. Commander Asha Rin arrived on Anchor 7 during Soot's 5th week as the station's Ority military liaison. She was there on routine assignment. She became aware of Soot on her first day. She contacted Veldrath academic researchers on her second day. The response she received back was classified before she finished reading it. She went to Corridor D that evening. She stood outside Ray's door for a moment. She could hear, faintly, from inside, the low, steady sound of something large and content, and a human voice talking about something she could not make out. Easy and unhurried, the way people talk when they are comfortable. She filed a preliminary report that night. The conclusion section read, "The imprint bond appears to be fully established. The human is unaware. I am uncertain of the correct course of action. I am certain that whatever this becomes, it will not look like anything we have a procedure for." She was correct. In Corridor D, Ray was reading out loud from a supply manifest he needed to memorize for the morning while Soot lay across his feet and the empty food bowl sat by the door waiting to be washed. The rule was 3 weeks old. It had never once been broken. It never would be. There is a kind of waiting that most creatures do not understand. Not the waiting of boredom, not the waiting of impatience, which is really just wanting something and being annoyed it has not arrived. This is a different thing, a still thing. The kind of waiting that does not shift or fidget or look for something else to do. It simply holds. It holds the way stone holds, or the way deep water holds, with no visible surface and no bottom either. Soot had been sitting at the door for 2 hours and 40 minutes. He had not moved. His tail was curled around his front feet. His wings were flat against his back. His orange eyes were fixed on the door with the specific quality of attention that living things give to things they are absolutely certain about. Ray was supposed to be home 2 hours and 40 minutes ago. The day had started fine. Ray's shift was a standard coordination review, the kind that ran predictably and ended on time. He had scratched Soot behind the horns before leaving, the same way he always did, and told him he would be back at the usual hour. Soot had watched him leave, then gone to sleep in the patch of warmth near the ventilation outlet, because that was what the hours between Ray leaving and Ray returning were for. Then Ren had knocked. Ren had her own access code for the room, given to her by Ray for emergencies. She had used it because she could not reach Ray directly, and the message she had received from the station relay was that his shuttle, returning from a routine supply review at the outer dock, had experienced a minor engine fault. No danger. Under repair. Return delayed by approximately 2 to 3 hours. She had come to tell Soot. She sat on the floor in front of him and explained it carefully. She showed him the message on her datapad, which Soot could not read but looked at seriously. Anyway, because it was something Ren was showing him and he gave Ren's actions the same focused attention he gave Ray's. She told him Ray was fine. She said the word fine several times in different ways. She told him the food was ready, and he could eat if he wanted. Soot looked at the door. Ren said, "He'd want you to eat. He'd say you don't have to wait." Soot looked at her. Then he looked at the door again. He shifted slightly, tucked his tail more neatly under his front feet, and resumed waiting. Ren sat with him for a while. Then she went and sat on Ray's chair because the floor was hard, and she watched Soot from there, and eventually she took out her datapad and started working because it seemed like the reasonable thing to do. Soot did not acknowledge her departure from the floor. He did not acknowledge anything except the door. Outside in the corridor, a station security guard named Pole had been assigned to monitor the situation from a safe distance. This was Commander Rin's doing. She had seen the alert about Ray's shuttle delay and had, with the particular instinct of someone who has been studying a situation carefully for 2 months. Immediately assigned a monitor to the door of Corridor D. Pol was a Griefian, practical and experienced, and he had read all of Commander Rin's preliminary reports. He understood what a Veldrath was. He also understood that the creature on the other side of that door was currently, by all accounts, just sitting there. He checked through the small corridor camera every 15 minutes. Every 15 minutes, Soot, at the door, not moving. The dignitaries arrived at the 90-minute mark. They were from the Concord Assembly, 3 of them, representatives of separate factions who had arrived on Anchor 7 for an unrelated meeting about a trade route dispute. They were important beings. They were used to being treated accordingly. Their escort had brought them through Corridor F as instructed, but a miscommunication somewhere in the administrative handoff had sent their luggage handlers through Corridor D instead. The luggage handlers were a pair of young Vethani assistants who had no idea what was at the end of Corridor D. They walked around the corner, stopped when they saw the shape in front of the door, and walked back around the corner so fast they nearly collided with the 3 dignitaries coming behind them. The dignitaries looked around the corner. So looked back at them. He had not moved. He was still in the same position he had held for 2 hours and 37 minutes. But when the new presences appeared in the corridor, his eyes moved to them with the calm, total attention of something that has identified a new element in its environment and is deciding what that element means. The first dignitary, a senior Griefian ambassador named Bel Taurus, had lived for 112 years and had been present at 3 historic diplomatic events. He looked at the Veldrath sitting in the corridor, and his body made every biological preparation for immediate flight without him consciously deciding to make any of them. The second dignitary, a Vethani trade minister named Sorrel, took 1 step backward and then stopped moving entirely because her body could not decide between backward and the floor and defaulted to neither. The third dignitary, an Ority logistics delegate named Kerr, was the one who decided to communicate. He was a practical being. He believed that most problems could be resolved through clear and respectful exchange. He squared all 4 of his primary shoulders and said, in clear standard trade language, "We mean no disruption. We are simply passing through." Soot tilted his head. Just once. Slowly. The way a creature tilts its head when it is listening to something that is not quite what it is waiting for. In Veldrath body language, this gesture had a specific meaning that Kerr did not know and could not have known. Researchers would later classify it in their documentation as acknowledged, non-relevant. You are not the one I am waiting for. To Kerr, standing in a corridor with a full-grown Veldrath's eyes on him, the tilt felt like something very old looking at him and making a decision. He did not pass through. None of them passed through. They stood at the corner of the corridor for 11 more minutes until Pol, monitoring the camera, came around from the other end and quietly redirected them to Corridor F. Bel Taurus said nothing during the redirect. He did not say anything for the next 20 minutes. He later filed a written account of the experience that described it as the most significant moment of his diplomatic career, which was a thing nobody had expected him to write about: a corridor and a dragon who had simply looked at him. Sorrel did not file a written account. She went back to her assigned quarters and sat for a while. Kerr filed a report that was remarkably detailed and factually accurate, and included the phrase, "The creature was not threatening. It was something more precise than threatening. It was certain." At the 2-hour and 51-minute mark, the station relay received a message from Ray's shuttle: repairs complete, departure confirmed, arrival in 19 minutes. Ren told Soot. Soot's ears, small ridge things that sat close to his skull, lifted very slightly. He kept watching the door. 19 minutes later, the door opened. Ray stepped in. He had his bag over one shoulder and the tired look of someone who has spent 3 hours watching mechanics argue about an engine component. He saw the food bowls by the door, untouched. He saw Soot, exactly where he was the moment Ray left that morning, looking at him. Ray put his bag down. He said, "Yeah, I know. Sorry I'm late." Soot made a sound. Not the small sound he had made as a hatchling. This one came from deeper. It was the sound of something very large that has been holding very still for a long time and has now decided it does not have to anymore. Ray sat down on the floor next to the food bowls. He said, "Okay, come on, let's eat." They ate. Ren watched from the chair. She did not say anything. There was a specific quality to the room now that had not been there before Ray came through the door, a kind of settled completeness, and she did not want to disturb it. Out in the corridor, Pol wrote in his incident log, "No escalation. Dragon waited. For human. Human came home. Situation resolved." He paused over the entry for a moment. Then he added one more line. "It waited 3 hours. It didn't eat. It just waited." He sent the log to Commander Rin. Rin read it that night, in her quarters, with the kind of expression that people get when something they already knew becomes something they feel. She forwarded it to the academic research team she had been corresponding with a single note attached. It kept the rule even when he wasn't there to enforce it. The response from the research team came back in under an hour. It was classified. Den Orth had made a great deal of money in his career by correctly identifying the moment when something that other people found frightening became something he could profit from. He was a broker, not the legal kind. He worked in the space between what things were worth on paper and what someone, somewhere, would pay to have them. It was a good business. It required clear thinking and low empathy, and a very accurate understanding of how other people's fear created opportunity. He had been watching the Anchor 7 situation for 4 months. A Veldrath, young but growing, imprint bonded to a single human. The galaxy was quietly terrified. The Concord was filing paperwork. Academics were writing classified reports. And in the middle of all of it, Ray Calloway was going to work every day and coming home and feeding his dragon dinner. Den Orth saw the imprint bond not as the complication that everyone else saw, but as a mechanism. The dragon was attached to the human, which meant the human was the lever, and levers, in Den's experience, were always the simplest part of any operation. The plan was straightforward. Intercept the human on his way back from his shift. Hold him somewhere quiet. Send a 2-person team into the quarters during the window before the dragon activated whatever it did when the window passed. Hit the dragon with a grade 7 containment field before it had time to process the situation. Load it onto a waiting transport. Be gone before the station security worked out what happened. He had hired good people, professionals. The containment unit they had sourced was military grade, rated for large aggressive fauna. He had checked the specs himself. He had done his research. The first thing that went wrong was Lieutenant Sarah Vo. Vo was 26 years old and had been on Anchor 7 for 5 weeks. She had come from active patrol assignment in the Outer Rim and had developed, through 2 years of working in places where things went wrong in ways that were not on any schedule, a very fast instinct for the moment before something happened. She was doing a routine corridor check near the supply docks when she saw 2 beings she did not recognize walking with slightly too much purpose in the direction of the route Ray always took home. She watched them for 30 seconds. Then she quietly changed her own direction. The interception happened near the junction of docking Corridor 9 and the main residential transit route. The 2 people Den had hired stepped into Ray's path with the calm of experienced professionals. They were carrying disruptor units set to non-lethal. One of them told Ray this was a simple matter. Nobody needed to get hurt, and they just needed him to come with them for a few hours. Ray looked at the disruptors. He looked at the 2 of them. He said, "No, you don't have a choice," the first one said. Ray hit him with a supply crate he had been carrying under one arm. It was a solid crate, full of medical inventory, and Ray had been doing physical logistics work for 15 years, which means he had better functional strength than most people assume when they look at a man in an aid corps uniform. The first one went down. The second one raised his disruptor, and Vo came around the corner from behind, and the second one's evening ended shortly afterward. Ray stood in the corridor with a bruised shoulder from where the first one had grabbed him before going down, and looked at Vo and said, "Thank you." Vo said, "Are you hurt?" "Not seriously." He looked toward the direction of his quarters. "How long have they been here?" Vo was already on her comm unit. In the quarters, Soot had known something was wrong for 12 minutes. Not through the comm, not through any message. The imprint bond did not work. That way, it was not a signal. It was not communication in any sense that could be described in technical language. It was older than that. It was the specific, bodily certainty of knowing where the bonded individual was supposed to be and knowing that they were not there yet and knowing that the not yet there was not. The ordinary kind. Soot went to the door at minute 12 and did not sit. He stood. There was a difference. When Soot waited for Ray under normal circumstances, he sat near the door with patience. This was different. This was 4 feet at the threshold, wings partially opened, scales changed from resting gray-black to the active dark bronze that Dyra had cataloged as condition alert in her research. Notes. His tail was not curled. It was extended. The amber orange eyes had gone to a color that was harder to describe because it was not steady. It moved the way a flame moves when there is wind it cannot see yet. Din's 2-person team arrived at the quarters at minute 22. They were professionals. They acknowledged this. They had the containment unit prepped, the emitters calibrated, the sequence ready. They had read the research notes that were publicly available about Veldrath behavior. They understood that the creature on the other side of the door was young. They understood it would be alert. They had the grade 7 field generator because they were not naive about what they were dealing with. The one thing the publicly available research notes did not cover was what a Veldrath in active imprint alert state looked like from a distance of 2 meters. The door opened. The first professional looked at Soot. Soot looked at the first professional. The containment emitter was in the professional's hand, powered up, aimed. He had done this kind of thing before with large and dangerous animals. He knew to move fast, to not hesitate, to establish the field before the target could react. He hesitated. Not because he was afraid. He was afraid, but that was not why he hesitated. He hesitated because he understood, in the very specific way that experienced. People sometimes understand things before they can put words to them, that the creature in front of him was not large, dangerous fauna. That category had nothing to do with what was in this room. Whatever was in this room was something that the grade 7 containment rating had not been written with in mind. He lowered the emitter 3 centimeters. Soot moved. Not toward him. That was the thing that neither professional would clearly describe afterward in the separate accounts they gave to separate authorities, in separate locations that had nothing to do with Anchor 7, because they had, both, independently, chosen to be somewhere else very quickly. Soot did not move toward them. He moved to the doorway, and he filled it, all of it, dark, bronze and ember, and the low sound that the station sensors would later log as a seismic precursor event, and he looked at them from the doorway with those eyes that were the color of a fire deciding what to do next. The first professional made his fastest ever decision. The second professional had already made hers. They left. Dock 9 was a long corridor, and they covered it in a time that neither of them would have believed was achievable before that evening. Soot watched them go. Then he walked back to the threshold of the quarters and stood at the door again. He did not pursue. He did not make any further sound. He stood at the door and waited, the same as he always waited, except standing. Now, and the color of him had not quite settled back to normal. Vo reached the corridor 8 minutes later with Ray beside her. Ray had his bag over his uninjured shoulder and the expression of a man who has had a long, an inconvenient evening and is now focused on what comes next. He saw Soot at the door. Soot saw Ray. There was a moment that Vo would write about later, in her incident report, in the single sentence she gave to it before moving on to the logistical facts. The dragon's coloration returned to normal in approximately 4 seconds. Ray walked to the door. He sat down on the floor of the corridor, right there, outside the threshold, because he could see that Soot needed a moment and Ray always knew when Soot needed a moment. He put his hand on Soot's neck, the big neck that had seemed so impossibly small when Soot had fit inside a jacket, and sat there while Soot breathed and the color finished settling. He said, "I know. I'm here. It's fine." Soot made the sound that had no good comparison. Older now. Bigger. But still. The same sound. Ray said, "Yeah. Okay. Let's go eat." They went inside. Den Orth was found the following morning attempting to access a dock transport. Under a false registry, he was in a condition that suggested he had not slept. He filed 3 separate communications to 3 separate legal representatives before station security processed him, and all 3 communications contained variations of the phrase, "I want it on record that nobody was actually harmed." This was true. He considered it his only good news. In the incident log, Lieutenant Vo wrote the sequence of events in full. At the end, she noted, because she believed in complete records, the Grade 7 containment unit was found in the corridor outside the quarters, undamaged and unused. The target species was not contained. The operation was abandoned by the individuals conducting it. The dragon was found at the threshold of its bonded humans. Quarters upon the human's return. The human was slightly injured. The dragon showed no injuries. They ate dinner. She submitted the log. Commander Rin read it that night and forwarded it to the Concord military observer network with a classification flag and a single line of her own. Request updated threat assessment. Previous assessments did not account for this variable. Nobody asked which variable she meant. They all knew. The summons came on a form that Ray had never seen before because it had never been used before. The Concord Assembly had a great many forms for a great many situations because the Concord Assembly had been governing interstellar affairs for long enough that most situations had happened at least once and had therefore been given a form. This one was new. Someone in the Assembly legal office had drafted it in the 2 weeks between the Dock 9 incident and the morning it landed in Ray's message queue. The title at the top read, Mandatory Appearance. Matters of Species Interaction and Public Safety, Veldrath Classification Review. Ray read it twice. Then he looked at Soot, who was currently lying across most of the floor of their quarters because Soot had grown again and the floor was finite. He said, "We have a meeting." Soot opened one eye. "Both of us," Ray said. The Concord Assembly's primary station was 3 days of travel from Anchor 7. Ray arranged the travel. He arranged the accommodations, which required several conversations about cargo space and structural weight limits, and what the word companion animal meant in a context where the companion animal in question was now the size of a large ground vehicle. He arranged it all with the same methodical patience he brought to everything, and on the 3rd day they arrived. And the Concord Assembly Station got its first look at Soot in person. The docking bay went quiet in a way that large spaces rarely go quiet. Soot walked beside Ray with the measured, unhurried stride he had developed as he grew, the stride of something that has never had reason to be nervous in any environment and does not plan to start. He was following Ray, and Ray was the orientation point for everything. Where Ray went, the direction made sense. The hearing chamber had been reorganized. Standard seating had been moved back. The central area was larger than it would have been for any other hearing in the Assembly's recent history. Ray took his designated seat. Soot settled beside him. In the cleared space, folded his wings, and looked at the assembled representatives with the calm attention of something that has been around enough different kinds of beings that variety no longer registers as interesting. Moderator Jill opened the proceedings. She was a Vethani elder, which meant she was old enough that most of the other beings in the chamber had not been born when she began her career. She had attended 3 Veldrath-related hearings in that career. She was one of only 3 living beings who had done so. She looked at Soot, and she looked at Ray. And she said, in a voice that had not needed to rise to be heard in about 40 years, "We will begin." The hearing moved through its stages. Representatives asked questions. They asked about the Riva 3 incident, which was where it started. They asked about Anchor 7 and the pattern of events there. They asked about the Dock 9 incident with a great deal of careful language and several loaded pauses. Ray answered everything, directly and without elaboration beyond what was asked, because that was how he handled official proceedings. Dyra had sent a written record. Commander Rin had sent 3 reports. Lieutenant Vo's incident logs were in the official packet. Ray's own contribution was simply to be present and accurate. Ambassador Darris spoke for the longest time. He was a Griefian, older, with the particular kind of sustained anxiety that comes from spending a career thinking about what could go wrong and finding, repeatedly, that the answer was more things. He had read every document. He had consulted with every available expert. He had, Ray would later note, done his research seriously and without bad intent, which meant that what he said next had to be taken seriously. He asked Ray if he understood what a Veldrath imprint bond was. Ray said he understood Soot was strongly attached to him. Yes. Darius said that was not quite accurate, and then he explained. He explained the biology of it, the evolutionary history, the way Veldrath bonded, in the wild, to their own kin groups, and what the bond meant in terms of function, the permanence of it, the fact that an imprinted Veldrath had, in every recorded historical case, treated the bonded individual as the single fixed point of its existence, that the bond did not fade, did not transfer, did not weaken with time or distance, that the historical record contained examples, across 4,000 years of documented Veldrath interaction, of what imprinted Veldrath had done when their bonded individuals were threatened, and those examples were the reasons certain clauses existed in Concord law that most people never needed to read. He explained this for 7 minutes. The chamber was very quiet. Ray listened to all of it. He sat in his chair with his hands on the table in front of him, and he listened without interrupting, because he was the kind of person who listened when someone was telling him something important. When Darius finished, the chamber waited. Ray turned his head and looked at Soot. Soot was already looking at him, the same way Soot always looked at him. The orange eyes, steady, the expression that had no name in any of the languages of any of the species in the room, because it was not an expression that needed a name. It was simply Soot looking at Ray. Ray looked back at him for a moment. Then he turned back to the assembly and said, "Okay, so we're family." Nobody spoke. The Grecian ambassador opened his mouth and closed it. Several representatives exchanged looks with the specific energy of beings trying to wordlessly agree on what had just happened. Someone at the back of the chamber made a small sound. Moderator Gilles laughed. It was not a diplomatic laugh, not the performed kind. It was the genuine laugh of someone who has lived long enough to recognize the exact moment when everything complicated resolves into something simple, and who finds it, every time, both funny and a little wonderful. She laughed for a few seconds, and then she composed herself, and the chamber settled, and she looked at Ray with the expression she reserved for the moments in her career she intended to remember. She said, "That is an accurate characterization." Then she moved to close the hearing. The legal ruling she delivered was based on the oldest provision in Concord law, a clause that had been written specifically for Veldrath imprint situations 400 years ago and had not been invoked since. The clause held that an imprinted Veldrath and its bonded individual constituted a recognized relational unit under Concord authority, and that the unit could not be separated by administrative, diplomatic, or legal means without the explicit consent of both parties. Both parties, in the legal framing of the clause, included the Veldrath. Soot had not consented to anything and was clearly not going to. This was legally binding. Ambassador Darius sat very still for the duration of the ruling. He did not object. He had read the clause. He had known this was the likely outcome. He had come to the hearing because he believed the information needed to be on the official record, and it was now on the official record, and he accepted the result. In the quiet way of someone who has done what he came to do. In the gallery above the chamber floor, one seat had been occupied by a figure that most of the representatives had noticed but not directly addressed. A full-grown Veldrath. She had been there when the session opened. She had not been on the attendee list. Nobody had asked her to leave because nobody had been willing to ask her to leave. She had sat through the entire hearing without moving, without speaking, without giving any indication of her purpose. When Gilles closed the hearing, the Veldrath in the gallery stood. She looked at Ray for a long moment. Ray looked back, the same way he had looked at Soot when he found him, with the direct, uncomplicated attention of someone who sees something and does not look away from it. The Veldrath left the chamber. She filed one document with the Concord archive before her transport departed. The document was short. It was a formal species recognition declaration, which was the Veldrath equivalent of a thing that had not been done for a non-Veldrath. In recorded history, it named Ray Calloway. The designation it assigned him was the closest translation the Concord system could produce, which was bondkin. Dyra read the document in her quarters on Anchor 7 when it became public record. She sat very still for a while. Then she added a note to her research file. The Veldrath species has formally recognized a human. This is the first time. The Concord system translates the designation as bondkin. The Veldrath term, in its original form, translates more directly as one who is held. She paused. She wrote one more line. He has been held since the first evening on the shuttle. He did not know it. Then, I am not sure it would have changed anything if he had. In the travel shuttle on the way back to Anchor 7, Ray sat in the seat beside the cargo bay where Soot had settled for the journey. He had a document reader in his hand with the official ruling on it. He read it. He put it down. Soot watched him from across the cargo space with the orange eyes that had watched him every day for the past year. Ray said, "Did you know about all that? The bond thing. The whole thing." Soot looked at him. "Right," Ray said. "Doesn't matter, does it?" He picked the document reader back up, finished reading the ruling, and added a note to his own records about updating Soot's official companion animal registration to include the new Concord legal designation. He filed it under family. Ray recorded the message the night before he left. He sat on the floor of the quarters because that was where he and Soot always sat when they talked, and he held the recorder and went through everything carefully. He covered the schedule, day by day. He said Ren would come by every evening with the food. He listed what the food would be, because Soot had preferences now, specific and consistent ones that Ray had learned over 3 years and considered as important as anything else in his preparation notes. He talked about the route the supply mission would take and roughly how long each leg would be. He said it would be 6 weeks, but that was an estimate, and if it ran shorter, he would be back sooner. Then he said, "The rule still applies. Every evening, I'm going to send a message. At dinner hour. When the message comes, that's when you eat." He paused. He looked at Soot, who was watching him with the full, steady attention he always gave Ray when Ray spoke to him seriously. Ray said, "I'll be back. You know that." Soot made a low sound. "Yeah," Ray said. "Okay." He left in the morning. Soot watched from the door of their quarters, not moving, as the sound of Ray's footsteps went down corridor D and turned the corner and was gone. Then Soot went back inside. He did not go to the threshold position. It was morning. Ray had not told him there was any reason to worry. He found the warm patch by the ventilation outlet, and he lay down in it, and he waited in the way of something that understands what 6 weeks means not as a duration but as a number of evenings that each in the same way. A message, then food. The mission went as these things go. Ray coordinated supply routing for 4 outer rim stations. He reviewed 3 disputed cargo manifests. He sat in 11 meetings and made progress in 8 of them. He sent a message every evening at dinner hour. Sometimes the message was short, just his voice saying, "Hey, I'm eating, you should eat too." Sometimes it was longer, if the day had been interesting. He described places he was passing through. He described the food he was eating and whether it was good. Once he described a view from an observation deck on one of the outer stations, a particular arrangement of star systems that he thought Soot would have watched for a long time, and he tried to put it into words well enough that Soot could see it a little. Every evening the message arrived. Every evening Soot ate. Ren came by each night with the food, and she always stayed for a while. She had taken on this responsibility without being asked, the same way she had taken on most of her relationship with Soot, by being present and consistent and asking for nothing in return. She was not Ray. Soot knew she was not Ray, but she was someone Soot had decided was good, and on the evenings when the message came in, his ears lifted and the sound of Ray's voice filled the room, Soot would look at the speaker and then look at Ren, and she always said the same thing. No, that's him. Now eat." Dyra had been off Anchor 7 for the first 3 weeks of Ray's mission, attending an academic conference where she had been asked to present her research. The research had become, in the galactic academic community, an event, not an ordinary Paper, not a study that other researchers engaged with professionally and cited, and moved on from. It had become the kind of work that people argued about, that changed the terms of a conversation that had been going on for decades, that made other researchers go back and look at their own assumptions about two specific things, what Veldrath were and what humans were. She returned to Anchor 7 on the 35th day of Ray's absence and went directly to Corridor D. She sat with Soot for a long time that evening. She had her documentation tablet, but she did not use it. She had been using it for 3 years. She had enough data. What she did not have yet was the last piece of it, and she knew the last piece was not going to be a data point. It was going to be a moment. She was waiting for the moment. The 38th day was when the message did not arrive on schedule. The relay station fault was minor. A calibration issue in an outer rim transmission hub. It affected a range of signals across a broad corridor of space. Ray's message was delayed. Not lost. Delayed. This was confirmed within 20 minutes by the station's communications team, who had been, since the Dock 9 incident, considerably more attentive to anything that touched on the question of Ray's well-being and Soot's awareness of it. Ren was in the quarters when the scheduled dinner hour passed without a message. She watched Soot. Soot had been near the ventilation outlet. When the dinner hour passed, he got up. He walked to the threshold. He sat down, his tail curled under his front feet. In the patient waiting posture, his eyes went to the door. Ren said, "Ray's fine. The relay is down. The message is on its way." Soot looked at the door. "I have confirmation," Ren said. "He sent it. It's just delayed. It's going to come." Soot did not move. Outside in the corridor, 3 different station personnel had gathered at a careful distance. Word had moved quickly. The dragon was waiting. The message was late. Nobody on Anchor 7 needed to be told what that combination had looked like before. The station security desk was very quietly on alert. Commander Rin was in her office with the door open and the comm active. Nothing happened. That was the thing that would stay with everyone who was there for it. Nothing happened. Soot sat at the threshold and was still in the way he was always still. When he waited, the patience that had no bottom to it, the certainty that did not need anything from outside itself. He was not distressed in the way that would have activated anything. He was not in the alert state of Dock 9. He was in the waiting state of every ordinary evening for 3 years, extended, held past its usual duration, unbroken. He believed the message was coming. He was going to wait. 2 hours and 11 minutes after the scheduled dinner hour, the station's communication relay received the delayed transmission packet and distributed it. Ray's message played in the quarters with the slight roughness of a signal that had traveled through an imperfect relay, his voice a little uneven at the edges, but clear enough in the middle where it mattered. He said, "Hey, sorry, bud. Relay trouble on this end. I'm fine, it's just a technical thing. I'm eating now. You should eat." Soot's ears lifted. Ren put the food bowl in front of him. Soot ate. Dyra wrote the last entry in her documentation that night. She had been composing it in pieces for weeks. The conclusion section, the part that every researcher eventually has to write where they say what all of it means. She had written it, and deleted it, and written it again. She had too many words, and then not enough. She sat with it for a long time that evening, and then she made herself stop, thinking about it the way she usually thought about research, and she wrote what was simply true. She wrote, "The subject demonstrates consistent, stable, voluntary behavioral compliance with routines established by the bonded human. This compliance persists across distance, time, and the subject's continued physical development into full apex maturity. The mechanism is not training. It is not conditioning. It is not fear. The subject waits because it wants to. It waits because the meal is not the point. The human coming home is the point." She looked at it for a while. Then she added the last line, the one she had not been able to find until she sat with Soot in the quiet of that evening after the message came and watched him eat, unhurried, satisfied, the way something eats when everything is right with the world. She wrote, "Every evening the human comes home, or sends word that he is coming. And every evening the dragon waits, and then eats, and the rule holds. It has Held for 3 years. I believe it will hold for the remainder of both their lives. I believe this because I have watched it. And because some things, once they become true, simply stay that way. She submitted the research to the Concord Academic Archive on the 42nd day. That was the day Ray came back. He came back a day early because the last supply coordination had resolved faster than expected, and he had rebooked his travel without announcing it because he knew Soot would be at the door regardless. There was no version of this where Soot was not at the door. He walked down Corridor D with his bag over his shoulder and the familiar, tired ease of someone who has been away long enough that coming back feels like putting something down. The corridor was quiet at this hour. The station ran in its usual rhythms. The lights were at evening level. His footsteps sounded the same as they always had in this hallway. He came around the last corner. Soot was at the door. Of course he was. He was in the patient waiting posture, tail curled, wings flat. The amber-orange eyes finding Ray the moment he came into sight and not looking away. He was very large now, full-grown. The doorway behind him framed him the way a doorway frames something that is the right size for a much bigger space. Ray stopped walking. Not because he was surprised, because he always stopped for a moment when he came home, at this exact point in the corridor, when he first saw Soot and Soot first saw him. He did not know when this had started being a thing he did. It had simply become a thing he did. He dropped his bag. He sat down on the floor of Corridor D, right there, 10 meters from his own door. Soot crossed the distance between them and lowered his great head and put it in Ray's lap with the care of something that is very large and has learned, over time, to be careful about the weight of itself around the people it loves. Ray put both hands on the sides of Soot's head. They stayed like that. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere on the station, an ordinary evening was happening. People were going about things. Ships were docking and departing. The Concord network was processing 10,000 communications about 10,000 ongoing matters. Out in the galaxy, things were enormous and complicated and constantly in motion. Here in Corridor D, there was just this. After a while, Ray said, "All right, let's eat." Soot lifted his head. They went inside. Someone on the station had recorded the moment Ray came down the corridor. Not with any formal intention. It was a maintenance camera, automated, doing what maintenance cameras do. The image it captured was a still, a full-grown Veldrath. Head lowered into the lap of a man sitting on a corridor floor, both of them. Still, the scene with the quality of something that has settled into itself. Completely. It moved through the Concord networks without any organized distribution. People. Sent it to people. A still image, no audio, no caption attached by whoever first shared it. It went where things go when they are true in a way that does not require explanation. The caption that attached itself, somewhere in the movement of it, written by a Vedhani commentator whose name nobody recorded. He waited. Not because he had to, because that is the rule. And the rule is the only thing that keeps the meal from being just food. Nobody asked who set the rule. In the quarters at the end of Corridor D, Ray was telling Soot about the view from the observation deck on the outer station. The stars arranged in a way that was worth describing. Soot was listening with both eyes open, the way he listened when something was worth listening to. The food bowls were empty. The evening was what it always was. The rule had held. It always would.